Diwan was born from a conversation amongst friends of if you could do anything, what would you do? And we kind of all said, well, I'd open a bookstore. And that's how we started. My relationship with Diwan was never a good one during her teenage years. So she's clearly a girl. Well, now she's an adult. While I had spent the last, 15, 20 years of my life selling other people's books, I did not feel qualified to write my own. When you have to write it yourself, there becomes a question. Is this worth the effort of writing? I know I talk about books and book selling in a very romanticized way, but that is my relationship with it, unfortunately, or fortunately. I mean, I think it's great, but not if you're my CFO.
Welcome aboard EMIT Talks. On this episode, we dive deep into the success story of Nadia Wassef, author, award winner, activist, and co-founder of the legendary Diwan Bookstores. From literally changing the landscape of the literature business in Egypt, to her work as an author, activist, and recipient of the UNICEF and Look Magazine Woman of the Year Award, we attempt to summarize and savor the chapters that make up the story of a truly inspirational woman. Join us as we take a dive into literature, business, and the art of bookselling with none other than Nadia Wassef, only on EMIT Talks. Welcome aboard EMIT Talks right here on this beautiful EMIT boat. And we are delighted, we've already introduced her, to have with us aboard EMIT Talks this episode none other than author, entrepreneur, and co-founder of Diwan Bookstores, Nadia Wassef. Nadia, welcome aboard EMIT Talks.
Thank you for having me. What a delightful morning.
It is an absolutely delightful morning, made more delightful by your presence. And
very kind of you.
Since our motto is diving deeper into success, we always ask our esteemed guests about failure first, because we believe that success never arrives without failure. So straight out of the bat or straight out of the boat, we'd love to ask you about potentially your favorite failures in life and in work that may have gotten you to the success that you are enjoying today. Sabah al-khair.
Wow. Well, let me start by saying that I'm constantly unsure of what success actually is. I think this definition changes regularly, and where I'm at with it at the moment is that success is the thing that nobody ever sees. That's true success. So outward success could be measured fiscally, could be measured in any number of ways. We like to always quantify everything. But I think true successes are the things that you master or gain control over that nobody actually ever sees and that you probably can't quantify. Having said that, I think my favorite failure continues to be my relationship with Diwan. Not Diwan, just my relationship with it. I think till today, I've stopped looking back, but I keep wondering, had I done this differently, what would today have been the outcome? I mean, it gets me nowhere, but it's an exercise in possibility. And I think that when you keep opening up possibilities, it just helps. You're able to see the world differently. And I think one of my biggest failures was that while, Hind, my sister, Nihal, our partner, and I started it together, we were the three active partners. We had two silent partners. I think at some point I should have walked away and I should have let the professionals, run it. And I didn't because I was too emotionally involved in it. But, it is what it is.
Very, very, very interesting. You were talking about possibilities, and I'd actually like to exercise those possibilities now and add a question to it. So I'll start by asking, you mentioned things you would have done differently. What would you have done differently? And the follow-up question to that is the difficulty of having a creative soul and a creative mind in contrast with entrepreneurship. And is that the cause of your relationship with Diwan, maybe?
So I'm going to start by saying that I struggle with the labels, and maybe it comes from being a reader, a writer. I think about words, and I remember that when we first started Diwan, and someone asked me, "What do you do?" I said, "أنا بياعة كتب," and that was looked at bizarrely. And then when I started going to international conferences as a bookseller, I became a bookseller. And then when Diwan started to have more than one branch, I became an entrepreneur. And these were all labels that other people put on me. I never took any of these labels. And I think, again, it makes you think, what does it mean? Yani, and 10 years ago, I think, or now 12 years ago, I found myself on the Forbes list of the most powerful women in the Middle East. And again, this is about quantifying and qualifying, because I asked them, I said, what does that mean? How are you measuring it? What's the metric
criteria,
here?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious because when with men, it's financial. You're on the Forbes list because you have this much money. But with women, it was about power or influence. So was it because we don't want to upset people? So we keep it to influence because even power might be too threatening? I wasn't sure. And I asked, and I still haven't gotten an answer, by the way, but it was just something that I'm curious about. Sorry, you asked me
What
about
you would have done differently in hindsight.
In hindsight, I would have left. After the first 4 or 5 years, I think I should have walked away and let someone else run it. But having said that, Diwan has never, in my mind, has never behaved well when we've treated it as a business. But when we've treated it as a coup de coeur, as something that has a life that is about impact, for me, I've always thought of Diwan as a person. So, I mean, I think we were at our worst when Diwan was a teenager. My relationship with Diwan was never a good one during her teenage years. So she's clearly a girl. Well, now she's an adult. Diwan turned 23 this year. Well, last year. This year she's turning 24, and I think we're learning to live together.
Speaking of her, Diwan, as a child, in the early years, 2002 onwards, a lot of people would say Diwan literally changed the face of the concept of bookselling in Egypt. And it offered spaces, safe spaces, creative spaces for people to sit, enjoy a coffee, and go through books. But you also went through the challenge of publishing, and you took on quite a few projects at the start as publishers. How did that contrast for you, the publishing side versus the bookselling side?
So
Especially during her early years.
the publishing is only 4 years old. So during the early years, I think I mean, I don't know if people remember, but I'd like to take you back. You would remember. I'd like to take you back to the Cairo of 2002. The cafe culture did not exist, right? So we had, people either went to a kind of nadi that they belonged to. كان في القهوة القهاوي اللي على الرصيف. But this kind of third space of the cafe where, your first space is your home, your second space is your work, and your third is the coffee shop, where it becomes a hybrid space where you can either, work or meet up with friends or whatever. That didn't exist. And I think Diwan came at a time where Cairo was ready for it. Also, 2002 was the year that Imarat Ya Ubyan was published. And at that time, again, we hadn't had an Egyptian bestseller in decades. Yep. I mean, I remember how everybody was reading Imarat Ya Ubyan, and everybody wanted to know who these characters represented. And it was a very interesting and intriguing story. And again, we hadn't had this kind of non-niche writing. I mean, this was for everyone. and people really bought into it. So I think all of these things combined كده created a kind of shift. What Diwan did at that time that was different was we we basically built the space that we wanted to hang out in and that we couldn't find. So we walked around and we traveled, we went to bookshops in different parts of the world, and we found these really inviting spaces with the cafe, with all of the stuff, and we said, you know what, we want to do this in our hometown, but we want to do it in a different way. We want to also bring, and people will find this funny, but at the time when we opened, we had VHS tapes of all the old Arabic movies. Eventually, we had DVDs, we had CDs, CD-ROMs. I mean, taban, all of this has now completely disappeared, but we had a huge multimedia section, and the cafe and stationery. We emphasized the centrality of the customer. You matter. At the time, again, I remember shopping downtown in all these different bookshops, and I would walk into these really dusty spaces where El Muazzaf I'd ask him for a book and he'd be a bit disinterested, and we wanted to do that differently. We wanted to show it differently. And of course, this idea that, again, at the time, there was this whole discourse about East and West, and we wanted to collapse this binary. And it's in Diwan's logo, it's in all of it, that there is, it's written in English with Noon al-Niswa fil akhir, with tashkil on the top and on the bottom. All of this was about collapsing binaries, bridging identities, and showing that, cultures don't form in vacuums. They form through interaction. Yani the oldest way that human beings have related to each other is through barter exchange. It's through trade. What is trade? Trade is the exchange of goods, commodities, services, people.
And ideas.
Ideas. So that was our starting point. And I have to say that as booksellers, what we also did that was interesting at the time was that we said, we are going to put our bestseller lists. Now, bestseller lists are important for authors and publishers because that's a success. But why are they important to readers? Because they're kind of a thermometer. First of all, they are introducing you to what other people are reading, which before Amazon and before collaborative filtering and before all of this, other people didn't know what other people
before
were reading.
Online rating culture and 4 out of 5 stars, etc., etc.
I mean, there was, the Sunday Times bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list, but that was there. That wasn't here. And so when Diwan would, publish its monthly fiction and non-fiction bestsellers, readers listened. So here is, and I'm sort of going to take you into the nitty-gritty of...
Please.
So here's the problem. You are a bookseller. And what are you doing? You are actually, what do you sell? Tell me something. If you're a bookseller, what do you sell?
Other people's ideas.
Yes, which is through, you sell browsing. You sell the intangible product, which is that you walk into my shop and you walk around and you browse. Browsing itself is not a commodity.
It's an ephemeral experience.
Exactly. And why are you browsing? Because I've curated a selection of books for you. The problem here is that, so the online world is infinite. The bookshop world, the brick and mortar bookshop world is finite. And I can only put in as many books as my space will hold. And I cannot afford hundreds and thousands of meters of books because the economies of scale do not work in my favor at that point.
Hence the curation.
So you have this going on. Now, and so your allegiance as a bookseller is to the reader, because you are telling the reader through these lists of what are people reading, who's reading what. You are in a constant dialogue with the bookseller. Let me just digress for 1 second. And مثلا, I have a theory that there is a reason why films and songs went completely digital. Like when we were growing up, there was HMV abroad. There was Borders, there was Tower Records, Our Price, all of this. This is all disappeared, okay? All over the world. You cannot walk into a shop today and buy a video, or you can't buy a tangible film or song anymore.
Except the ones that are popping up as vintage stores,
Vinyls,
yeah,
the
as a trend
vintage.
sort of thing.
Yeah. But today, the majority of this is done digitally. Why? Because the means of distribution the means of distribution and the product merged. They became one. The song became the downloadable, the film became the streamable. So the middleman got cut out. In the case of books, yes, audiobooks, ebooks, Kindles, you name it, it's all happening. But book selling is still very strong and people still go to brick and mortar shops. Why? It's because of the bookseller and the community around that. It is because of the fact that we curate and we choose and we enter into a dialogue. Bookselling has never been anything other than a dialogue. And that's why I think it's still alive, because people crave that. COVID taught the whole world that in 2022, globally, more independent bookshops opened than in the 10 years before. And that comes from the fact that people realized we need community. We cannot exist alone. And bookshops are exactly that. They are at the vanguard of community building. So let me just put a pin in this and go back to, so what happened with bookselling and publishing? So when the rest of our partners decided to open a publishing house, Hind and I were against it because we believe that we are bona fide booksellers and we want to stay that way. And the minute you become a publisher, your allegiance shifts. Your number one person is no longer the reader.
It's the author, isn't it?
It's the author, it's your own books. Your loyalties become split. And unless you are able to maintain a complete Chinese wall between the two, it becomes very difficult.
Do you feel it becomes more, as a business, more profit focused than focusing on that ephemeral experience of the actual bookseller?
It's not about profit. It's more about, I mean, I know I talk about books and book selling in a very romanticized way, but that is my relationship with it, unfortunately, or fortunately. I mean, I think it's great, but not if you're my CFO. But I think it just becomes that at the end of the day, this is your book. You have labored over it. You've seen it from inception to production. You've gone through all the phases of it. You want to push it. You want to tell people, this is my book. Look at this book. Read this book. You can't help yourself. And so your allegiance starts to shift. I see it happen. And we try to we constantly find ourselves trying to walk this tightrope and say, no, stop. Yeah, when we published the Kalsoum book, I can't help myself. I mean, this has become my go-to gift to people. I wouldn't have done that before. But I'm so proud of it. I love it. I think it's a spectacular coffee table book. I love the photographs. I love the stories. I gift it to people. I can't help but, walk into a shop and see it in the window. I'm happy. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
There is no right and wrong. There's right for you, and clearly it is right for you. And you mentioned ebooks and you mentioned audiobooks, and you mentioned the digitization of media in general, and the world is rapidly progressing towards that. But you also mentioned there seems to be a comeback towards paperback and hard copy in general, especially being driven by the younger generations. Do you think that is a nostalgia thing? Do you think that maybe the kids today are realizing, wait a minute, I stare at the screen all day long. I need a different experience in my life, something more physical. What would you attribute that to?
I don't think, like any good question, it kind of gets multiple answers. I don't think there is one clear sort of thing that I would ascribe any of this to, but I would say that it's a combination. It is the fact that being, screenagers are not just teenagers. It's people like us. We've become screenagers.
Absolutely.
In your 40s and 50s, older, even much older people, the screen becomes their window onto the world. I think there is a backlash against that. I also think that people are looking for authenticity. And, in many ways, yeah, sure, I can download this song, but the vinyl records, that's something. First editions, this is another world, and it's your own world. And it's, برضو, you having a tactile relationship with a product like a book or a record or a film, it's stunning. And these things also, there's an artistic quality to it. I mean, most of the book covers, vinyl covers, the film posters, I mean, they're
It's art in its own sense.
absolutely, and it's part of the multifaceted components to all of this. People are starting to appreciate it, and we need to. And not to mention, of course, the community aspect of this. Maho, I remember when the internet was born, and we were told that this was going to be the most democratizing force in our lives, that all knowledge was now going to be equalized through accessibility. 20 or 30 years on, each of us lives in their own echo chamber.
Yep.
So this dream of democracy and accessibility has become a kind of, we live in a very autistic universe. And I'm not sure I'm happy with what the algorithm does to my life. Because in many ways, and today, my primary source of news is through my phone. Again, that is curated in a very slanted way. And these are all things that I think when you maintain a kind of community, Mahu, it offers you alternatives. It's again this idea of possibility. When I just exist in my own echo chamber and I'm only exposed to what the algorithm gives me, I'm cut off from all possibility. I'm actually completely disempowered. But when you belong, for instance, to a book club, you end up reading other people's choices that you might not necessarily like, but it's exposure. You read them.
You physically meet other people and exchange.
And you disagree with them on their viewpoints. I belong to a book club, and I've had to read books that I would never have picked in a million years. And I've been very grateful for the experience.
And you mentioned senses like tactile, and sometimes it's more than tactile senses. I think from the top of my mind instantly recall the smell of a brand new book. So it's not just the tactile senses. It can be a multitude of senses, and that brings me to a word you mentioned twice, curation, and how being a bookseller, it really is all about the curation. So from your point of view, I'd like to ask, what makes curation successful from both a bookseller's point of view and maybe contrasted from an author's point of view?
So in 2001, when we were setting up the company and really thinking, what does Diwan mean? What is it trying to achieve? My sister and partner, Hind, who was in charge of the Arabic books, and I did the English books. It was the first time I had heard someone refer to curation, because she said, I want to curate the shelves of the Arabic book section. Because bear in mind, again, يعني إحنا في مصر, you have availability of countless authors, and you have a huge canon, a literary canon behind you to choose. What do you choose? يعني Naguib Mahfouz alone has 55 works. يعني you're kind of done when you've got all 55.
At the Hassin, for example, yeah.
يوسف السباعي, you name them. يعني بلاء مصطفى محمود, 90 titles. So it's this kind of, so at the time, this was the thought process in we have to choose. And so that's one way, that's put a pin in that. The other thing is that when you look at book selling as a dialogue, so what happens with dialogue? conversation. You can either drive it, you can interrupt it, you can eavesdrop on it. There's you position yourself differently. So in Diwan, I think for me, when I talk about the English books, there are three different kinds of books for me. And I'm now just talking as someone who's stocking books. There is the bestseller. So this has just come out. You need to have this. There is the long seller. And this has been selling steadily for the last 20, 30 years, and it will continue to sell. Something like Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom.
1984.
1984.
Lord of the Rings.
Paulo Coelho. You know, they sell. And they captured a certain moment in time. They appeal to some people, always want to read them. And then, for me, there is the element of surprise. People like the familiar, but if you keep giving them the familiar, they will get bored. So I will reel you in and I will offer you comfort with what you've heard of, what you know, but then I have to surprise you. I have to give you the unexpected because you need to keep coming back. So for me, it was that. It was always, and I would have sort of bets with myself. I would pick a title and I'd be like, will this actually sell? I mean, I would read it, but how many of this can I sell possibly? And I think it's that. So I think it is the familiar and the unexpected that you kind of navigate between. And also, I mean, in every category of books in Diwan, there are two kinds of bestsellers. There is the international one that is mirroring what's happening in the rest of the world. So, what's her name? Mel, the Let Them theory. I can never remember her name. Mel.
Not sure.
Anyway. Yeah. Mel Robbins? مش فاكرة. Anyway, so for instance, she sells like mad. Great, we'll have her. But then you'll always have the local, right next to the global. So in a cookbook, you'll be selling Jamie Oliver, but you'll also be selling Samia Abdenoor, the Cairo kitchen. There's always that element in fiction. You'll have all the international authors and the Sally Rooney's and that, but you will always have the local equivalent.
And how much did you take that upon you to always elevate the local equivalent? So if I'm putting a best-selling fiction novel, then I'm also putting a best-selling fiction novel for
our readers.
Did that come into?
No, our readers do it for us. I mean, we, in a sense, but hey, what you have to take upon yourself is to constantly listen. That's the thing, because it's very easy to just go into a kind of monotonous. No, you have to actively listen to what are people reading, what are they asking about, and it's so important that. I think Diwan's biggest asset to date is the people who work at Diwan. For customers and readers, the most visible will be the guys on the shop floor that are helping you, our customer service guys. But it's the whole package. It's the whole ecosystem. They listen, they care, they're engaged, they're involved. And this, didn't come easily and didn't come accidentally.
So that's from the bookseller's point of view. From Nadia, the author's point of view, what would make you go into any bookstore anywhere in the world? What makes the curation just right from the author's point of view?
So I don't go into bookshops because I'm looking for curation. I go into bookshops من باب الفضول.
Okay.
And I always want to know, what are they doing? How are they doing it differently? Because there's always something to learn from someone. I remember the first time I walked into Daunt's bookstore on Marylebone High Street in London, and their fiction section is not done by the last name of the author. It is arranged by the nationality of the author. So rather than have, A to Z, you have Italy, France, Egypt, South Africa, Australia.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
It's a different, I'm not saying that it works, by the way. But it helps you look at the book in a very different way. And so this is a kind of curation that is extremely different. And my favorite section in Diwan is called Egypt Essentials. And this was a section that we started from the very beginning. And it was this idea that any one single narrative of Egypt is a lie, or it's an incomplete truth. And so, what is a Cubist painting? A Cubist painting looks at something from multiple angles all at once. And that's what we did. So, under Egypt Essentials, you had cookbooks, fiction, non-fiction, photography books, history, politics, cookery, you name it, in Arabic, in English, in French. And for us, this was Egypt Essentials. So pick a book, get acquainted. You might like it, you might not like it, but it's a starting point.
It's very, very, very interesting. And starting point for you during Corona lockdown, that was the starting point for you to write. But, Bookshelf Chronicles of a Cairo Seller. I am curious because I'm a big fan of different methodologies. And writing requires a multitude of different methodologies.
Yes.
So I'm curious about your process in writing and what makes a process more successful than another from your point of view.
Okay, so I think writing is for me, it has been a solitary endeavor that is brutal. And I pick this word consciously. But when you come out the other side, it's very liberating. But the process itself is painful. I started writing Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller in March of 2020. I had gone back to school in London, and I did a master's in creative writing. Because while I had spent the last 15, 20 years of my life selling other people's books, I did not feel qualified to write my own. And I didn't really want to write about Diwan. But it was also at a time when I was still very much struggling to understand my relationship with Diwan. And life hack, if you ever want to understand something, try writing it down. Because in the act of having to actually put words to paper, there's a kind of logic that you have to follow through. And you realize where the flaws are when you write it down, because it's in your head, you jump some steps. But when you have to put it down, there's no jumping. You actually have to continue in a kind of progression. And you can't cheat that. So I started writing about Diwan, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And in the beginning, it was like a data dump. So I sat down, I wrote it all down, and then I threw it out. And then I went back again, and I said, I need an organizing principle. So my organizing principle was, well, if I was in a shop, what would I do? I'd walk through the bookshop. So I divided every chapter into a section of the bookstore so that I could methodologically organize. I need structure. So I found the structure in mirroring an actual structure that exists. I think for me, my process, and it's a little bit rough. I start at 4 a.m.
Wow.
When the world is quiet, when I can trust that my phone won't beep, when I won't get any emails, I won't, I'm okay.
Minimal external stimulus.
Yeah. And so from 4 a.m. until 11 a.m. approximately, I would have 2 very big pots of coffee, and I would write new things. I wouldn't edit, I wouldn't, it was just like 7 hours of that from 4 to 11. And I would leave myself hooks. So in case I was stuck on something, I would be able to move to something else. From 11 to 2, I would edit the work of the previous days. Because by that time I'm sort of deflated and out of steam. so I can just edit. And a lot of the times I would print out what I'm editing, and I would do it by hand, because again, the more digitized something is, the easier it is to, control
Just
X,
go through
control
it. Yeah.
C, control V, control. When you have to write it yourself, there becomes a question: is this worth the effort of writing?
Ooh, it's a question.
It's a
It's a
question.
question.
So I would sort of sit and write and rewrite and be like, actually, and when your hand hurts and because you've been doing this for a few hours, and then you actually choose to keep this or delete this, but that you're actually doing it because you really care. And then I had a very ruthless editor who I very much appreciate, but at the time, I would send her chapters or something. And I would tell her, okay, so I'm done with this chapter, and she would look at it, and we'd have a Zoom to discuss it. And yeah, she was brutal, and she'd pick bits, and she'd be like, "You're very attached to this, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I love this paragraph." She's like, "Yes, it's overwritten. Delete it." And it's things about, overwriting, how to maintain a certain rhythm, how to break that rhythm. Another sort of editing hack is you have to read things out loud to yourself. Again, because you need to hear it. When you read quietly on the page, you don't get the same thing. It's when you hear it out loud, the sentence, the rhythm of the sentence, the words you've chosen, the punctuation, they take on a very different life.
Absolutely. I mean, I am also a fan of although it is very much in the creative realm, where most creatives' heads are usually in the sky. I am very much a fan of that form of structure. Comes to my mind the Akira Kurosawa method. He would say, "I don't care, but for 365 days of the year, I will wake up and I will write one page of text." And that brings me to what you mentioned with your editor, the relationship between that author-editor relationship. How would you advise, having experienced it for yourself, how would you advise an author and an editor to go about it to create a best practice?
So I have to first explain that it's all about, there's an ecosystem and you operate within the ecosystem. So in Egypt, the publishing ecosystem is very different to what exists in Europe and America, for instance. So in the UK, I have an agent. This agent, I sent her my book proposal. She shopped around, sent it to different publishers in the UK and the US who might be interested. Eventually, we reached an agreement, and I signed a contract. I was given an advance, and the publisher who bought the rights to my book also gave me an editor from within that so it's called Farrar, Straus and Giroux. They're my US publishers, and I worked with this editor that I would send her chapters, and this is someone who has a bird's eye view of what I'm doing. When you're writing, you're involved in the nitty gritty, and you're in the trenches, and you lose sight. You sit and agonize over a paragraph for 7 hours. You've lost sight of the 300 pages.
The bigger picture, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas this editor hasn't. And this is the relationship in many ways. Now, here an editor doesn't do the same thing. In Tahina, by the time you've gotten to the editor, you're basically editing language, style, syntax, format. You don't have the role of the editor, which is the person who sort of has the bird's eye view, who's looking at the whole thing, and who is challenging you on what you've written, the direction that this is going on, the order of the chapters. Why does it end here? What is your bigger picture? Where would you start? Plus, you don't have an agent here. So the role of the agent is extremely interesting, because the agent is kind of like your manager. And they're sort of telling you, well, if you, because at the end of the day, this is a business as well.
Yep.
So they're telling you, if you pitch it to this kind of audience, you've already written on this subject, you can shift gears or go in this direction. The market is saturated at this point. So if you're going to repeat this, it might not work. I mean, again, these are all conversations. I mean, nobody is imposing anything on you, but they're challenging you. They're making you think and rethink, and you think about positioning and where I stand and how. And again, one of the things that we are missing here is comprehensive data.
Absolutely.
If you don't have data in this day and age, you do not exist.
Absolutely.
So today, for instance, I don't have data, not complete data, on how many books a year are published in Egypt. I actually don't know.
General Egyptian reading trends, English versus Arabic, fiction versus
Scientific versus academic versus
self-help
non-academic.
versus...
Nothing.
Is there no entity that can provide us? Are we just, in general, as a country, not collecting this data, not collating
Well,
it?
I mean, I think there is official government data that something like CAPMAS collects, but there is no centralized entity where all of this data is collected and collated. Versus, for instance, in the UK, you have the Booksellers Association. And this is just for booksellers, not publishers. And the Booksellers Association, they send out a survey every year to all their members, and their members fill it in. And you come back with data such as this number of bookstores opened, this number of bookstores closed. Of the ones that are still functioning and opening, 37% have a cafe, 42% have 5+ staff members. I mean, this is serious data, because you are then able to make very calculated and informed decisions and يعني طبعا geographically, where is everything located. احنا النهارده يعني I would love to open في المحافظات. I don't live في المحافظات. I don't have sufficient data that would help me realize طب افتح في المنصورة، طب اروح طنطا،
And
طب
what to
اروح
stock that
أسيوط.
one with versus what to stock that one.
بلاش ستوك، افتح فين؟
Interesting. Very interesting.
What's per capita spending? Who is buying what? we haven't even stocked. I just want to know how many square meters, in what governorate, in what markaz, in what street. That's all I want to know.
From an entrepreneurial standpoint, that sounds like a business model on its own that can further be sold out to other people.
But I think good entrepreneurship always starts from questions.
Absolutely.
So I keep asking questions, and actually this is what's lovely. I get random answers from people that prompt me to keep on asking.
Data. The online world is full of data.
Nothing but.
And I'd like to contrast, or actually pick your brain on what you think of the newer styles of writing that are emerging. Things like Substack, people who are publishing one chapter a day or one chapter a month. And that sort of business model versus the brick and mortar business model. And from an author's point of view as well, how do you feel about people who are, venturing into that sort of world? Not that there's a right or wrong, but how do you feel about it?
Look, I believe in process and I believe in experimentation. So I think everything in this world, and this is where I differ from, I think, the Gen Zers. Anna, for me, the number one ingredient of anything is ridiculous amounts of hard work. I think that's a generation thing. And I'm not judging people who disagree, because I get told things like, don't work hard, work smart. Fine, sure. That's not what I was brought up on. That's not the terrain that is familiar to me. And I think we all we veer towards familiarity. Although I've just spent time telling you how I like to challenge the familiar. But no, I think all of these new trends of Substack, flash fiction, I like the process. I like the spirit of experimentation. The one thing that I would like us to not really lose is the fact that it needs to require engagement. Yani, earlier, before we started filming, we were talking about Netflix and how, viewer attention spans have diminished, and therefore the content is now being driven or geared towards catering to this diminished attention.
They've got to let you open up your phone and doom scroll for a couple of minutes and not lose the plot.
I would very much like to work in a way where we try and work against that. That's my only criteria. I think, our attention is probably the most valuable commodity that we own today. And I think we need to spend it wisely. Yani, that's my take home from this. Or this is, I know we veer towards the path of least resistance, but if there is one thing that we can resist, it is giving away our attention. Let's at least try and spend it wisely. And I am for any kind of format or subscription model, non-subscription model, whatever it is. But I just want us to be conscious of that.
It's very, very, very interesting. And as we get better at writing, or as we are starting to write differently, I feel we're also getting much better in writing and quantifying our own emotion into code and giving that to AI. So that's a question. How do you feel about the future of writing and AI getting involved in it? As a person who does a lot of voice-related work, I think we're going to get, eliminated very, very, very quickly by the AI machine. So what's going to stop us as authors or as writers or as booksellers from AI taking over that industry completely?
Look, I don't think you can fake human emotion. I mean, for now. But let me take you back 7,000 years or so. No, 3,500 years. So when writing began, you had the cuneiform in Sumeria, where, it was these triangular shapes on tablets.
Yep. Clay tablets.
You have the 10 Commandments on tablets. So the tablet culture is happening. Now, with the birth of papyrus as a means of writing on, what if you introduced, I'm going to call papyrus a disruptor. We all like to talk about, disruptors so I think papyrus is a disruptor. And actually I was reading about this in a book written by Nadim Sadiq, and it's called Shimmer Don't Shake.
Okay.
And he has Quiver Don't Quake as well. And a lot of this is about AI and publishing. So I highly recommend both of Nadim's books. So papyrus comes into this scene, and papyrus becomes a disruptor because of what? Because with the birth of papyrus, we have the birth of expendability. You can actually bin it and write it all over again. But with the tablet, you have to chisel it off again, and but with papyrus, it's a bit of paper. It's a bit of, plant turned into paper that you can write on.
It's a more
it's more accessible, and it's easier.
It's a more streamlined process.
It's a streamlined process. So this is 3,500 years ago. Today, what I'm trying to say is that, with AI, we are faced with our own expendability. With papyrus, it changed the way things were done. Papyrus is technology. AI is a different kind of technology, but I choose to look at it for now as a new way of collaborating. Because, who would turn down the chance to have a conversation, not with the smartest person in the room, but with the most well-informed person in the room? You'd be really daft to turn it down. But having said that, writing, creativity, all of these things, they're a muscle. You have to keep exercising that muscle. You don't give it up. So, masalan, when you are working with AI, there is a science to engineering the prompt.
Absolutely.
And I believe this is something that is being taught now. And I think that, you know what? If you can become expendable as someone who if the job that you're doing can be farmed out and done more efficiently, that doesn't rule you out, but you have to refocus your skills, your skill set into something else. But I think if this is something that can unleash creativity, I'm all for it. I don't think the MO here should be that we turn our back on it or that we treat it with fear and distrust. I think this is something that we need to nurture. And by the way, I also, yani, one of my concerns is that when you look up things, so AI is an engine. At the end of the day, all these different engines, they are fed with data. Now, I think the problem that faces the Arab world is that we don't feed it with our data. So if you go and look up, مثلا, Lobna of Cordoba, or there was a very famous Moroccan lady who had one of the earliest libraries in the world, going back, I think, 1,200 years. There is zero data about them because we haven't done our work. We haven't fed volumes of Arab cultural history, Egyptian cultural history. And that's something we need to do because you have to feed the engine. You have to actually build the ecosystem that maintains. I mean, again, if you don't have data, you don't exist. And data is not just something we aggregate and collate now, it's also the past. So this is something we have to conserve and really work on systematically.
You mentioned the past, and I want to jump straight to the future. The future, in your mind, of
Sorry, I've
no
killed
worries.
myself.
Yes, the future of Diwan as a bookstore, and future projects from you as an author.
Right. Okay. I'll tell you two things. The future of Diwan, I think, is in its ability to become a cultural hub. I think with everything that's going on in the world, people crave community. They will continue to crave community because community is just an extension of our basic humanity. And what I think Diwan does beautifully and what I would like to see more of is that it brings people together. Yani Anna, I'm just going to say that there have been some really rewarding moments in setting up Diwan. But the thing that never gets old and that every time someone says it to me, it brings me a tremendous amount of joy, and it's like the first time I've heard it, is when someone tells me, I grew up in Diwan. I remember buying books from you. I remember the first time I heard of so and so, or read this, or was introduced to this idea, or this thought was through Diwan. And to me, this is incredibly gratifying.
I remember the first time I realized, what do you mean I can give you an IBAN of a book and you can order whatever book I want from anywhere in the world? I remember how that felt, and the amount of books that I ordered, some of them life-changing books for me, came through Diwan because you were the first in Egypt to offer that service.
And I'm just going to tell you, speaking of the past, that was at the time when ISBNs were 10 digits, not 13, and we used to do stock takes manually. So that was really painful on so many levels. But so for me, the future of Diwan is in community building, in bringing people together, in bringing ideas to people, in continuing that mix, because you can sit and doom scroll and you can do a ton of different things online, but you can't do that. So, and it takes a special sense and a special kind of ability to do it. And I think Diwan does that really, really beautifully. For me, so writing is this thing that, okay, let me just backtrack and say that Diwan was born from a conversation amongst friends of, if you could do anything, what would you do? And we kind of all said, well, I'd open a bookstore. And that's how we started. It was one of those, if you could. So this sort of like, let's look at the world of infinite possibility and dream. And a few nights ago, I was having dinner with my family, and the conversation was, what is the one job or what is the one thing that if you weren't doing, that if you're not doing right now, you would love to do? And I said, I would really like to go back to writing because it's the one thing that I find so incredibly painful. And so I avoid it. So I take on other things. But yeah, so I would like to write, and I know exactly what it is that I want to write, and I know the structure, and I know where it's taking place. It's complete fiction, and you're gonna have to invite me back to talk about that.
We certainly will invite you back to talk about that. Nadia Wassef, thank you so much for coming aboard with us on EMIT Talks today and for sharing all those wonderful insights.
Thank you. I've enjoyed myself tremendously. The weather's been great. The conversation even better. Thank you.
Thank you very much.